For thousands of years, people have told stories about strange experiences that we cannot explain. Stories that conflict with our understanding of reality. Some of those stories found their way into print, to be read by hundreds, thousands, or even millions of readers before being consigned to the oblivion of the archives. In this series, we dust off forgotten newspaper clippings, magazine articles, and letters from the library of the late Gary Mangiacopra, one of the most prolific collectors of strange stories in the world. Join us as we uncover the forgotten secrets of the archive.
I'm currently suffering from a lung infection, which makes narration impossible, and so this video will regrettably be narrated by Robot Me. Let me know how he does. Box 6 of the Gary Mangiacopra archives is the largest of the boxes I've scanned so far. It is essentially a collection of people's names, organized in alphabetical order. The first folder in the box is dedicated to R. Tucker Abbott, an American seashell and mollusk expert. The last folder is one of only 3 in the box, not dedicated to a human being, containing issues 2, 3, and 4 of a 1978 publication called Stigmata, which chronicles mysterious incidences of animal mutilations. I expect I'll find the remaining folders from T to Z in another box. Most of the items in the folders are newspaper clippings and magazine articles. A few contain pieces of correspondence, often between Gary and his fellow researchers, written in the 1970s and 80s. One folder that I personally found interesting was that on Francis J. Dickey, a Canadian writer from whose work I have drawn in the past. In private correspondence, Gary told me that Dickey was once in possession of a photo of the Ogopogo, the legendary monster of Okanagan Lake, which he submitted to a Canadian newspaper around 1934. The photo and accompanying column was republished in the November 1973 issue of the magazine Anomaly, with the addendum, "This undated clipping from a Canadian newspaper, apparently circa 1934, was located by one of our correspondents. Does anybody out there know anything about this photo?" Gary made several fruitless attempts to uncover the mystery behind the photograph, as evidenced by a letter he received from Canada's Consumer and Corporate Affairs, which comprises the archive's Box 6, Folder 42, Item 2. The folder dedicated to John Keel, the American journalist and author of the book The Mothman Prophecies, contains some correspondence between Keel and Gary, which indicate that the two researchers met in person in the mid-1970s. The folder also contains a 5-page typewritten biography of Keel, spanning the years 1949 to 1957, which Gary wrote himself, describing Keel's philosophic aversion to war, which developed during his service in Korea, and the making of his first book, Jadoo, on the mysteries of the Middle East and India. Although the document is not dated, the strange decision to restrict the biography to 1957, 52 years before Keel's death, seems to imply that it may have been written that year, when John Keel was 27 years old and Gary was only 7. Though improbable, this remote possibility accords with Gary's self-description as a Fortean groupie in his younger years. Of all the folders in Box 6, 2 of the most interesting are dedicated to Charles Fort, the godfather of the study of the unexplained, for whom the term Fortean was named. These folders contain copies of handwritten letters, which Fort both penned and received. Some of the letters touch on the 80-foot-long body of a supposed sea serpent, which was recovered by fishermen in Soldiers Bay, off the coast of Miami, Florida, in 1921. The vast majority, however, are inquiries into and exchanges of information regarding what Gary called the Rondout Creek Sword, an enormous blade which fell from the sky in a blaze of fire, to land upright in a tributary of the Hudson River, in New York's Catskills Mountains. In this video, we will retell the forgotten story of the so-called meteorite sword of Rondout Creek. According to a succession of articles in the New York Times, the story begins on April 17, 1883. Early that morning, while riding his horse along a bank of Rondout Creek, not far from the village of Accord, New York, a physician called Dr. Thomas O. Keeter caught sight of a glowing object falling from the sky. He described the meteorite, as he supposed it to be, as a ball of fire about as large as a wagon wheel. With an audible whir, the object plummeted to the earth and plunged into Rondout Creek no more than a dozen yards away, spraying pebbles in every direction. Dr. Keeter would have inspected the object, enshrouded by steam and bubbling water, had it not been for the objections of his horse. The next morning, Keeter described his experience to 59-year-old Daniel D. Bell, the farmer on whose land the meteorite had fallen. For several weeks, Bell searched Rondout Creek for the mysterious object, but met without success. On May 7th, 20 days after the incident, Bell's 16-year-old son, Rayleigh H., discovered what he first took to be a bent and rusted scythe embedded in the earth beneath Rondout Creek, at what proved to be the exact spot where the doctor had his remarkable experience. With the help of a friend, he managed to wrest the artifact from its terrestrial prison, discovering, to his delight, that it appeared to be a massive two-handed sword that had been buried hilt down in the mud, apparently warped by the violent impact with which it hit the earth, and rusted as a result of its 3 weeks in the water. Rayleigh took the weapon home to his father, who straightened it, polished it, and inspected it. The sword was found to measure a whopping 5 feet 10 inches in length, and to weigh 17 pounds. Its steel blade was 2.5 inches wide, and the 11-inch long hilt was nearly too thick for a human hand to properly grip. It had 2 guards, like the massive German Zweihanders of the late Middle Ages, which protruded 10 inches on either side of the hilt. To each arm of the upper guard was attached a prong, which one journalist likened to the guards on late 19th century carving forks, designed to protect the hand from an unskillful thrust of the carving knife. The most intriguing elements of the sword's design were the strange markings that covered the hilt, a succession of inscrutable hieroglyphics made by dots impressed into the metal, which, taken together, seemed to form a map of Greece. Journalists unanimously agreed that the sword was unwieldy, one reporter commenting that the weapon would prove useless in the hands of all but the likes of heavyweight boxer John L. Sullivan. Bell brought the strange object to what may have been the office of his relation, one J.J. Bell of New York City, who worked on William Street in Lower Manhattan. The artifact was then put on display for anyone to freely view, and in the ensuing weeks, thousands of curious New Yorkers stopped by the office to gaze upon the curiosity showcased in the window. Many left with their own pet theories as to the nature of the strange artifact. Some supposed that it had come from a far-off planet, peopled by warriors of enormous stature, and had been, as one article put it, warped by the heat from its rapid journey through space. Others supposed the sword's appearance to be a sign of the end times, noting that the early Christian writer Lactantius, advisor to Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, wrote the following prophecy in Book 7, Chapter 19 of his 4th century theological work, The Divine Institutes. Suddenly, a sword will fall from the heavens, so that the just may know that the leader of the holy warfare is about to descend. A similar, more ancient prophecy was said to have been uttered by one of the Sibyls, the female oracles of ancient Greece, who were supposed to become possessed by the spirits of the Greek gods they served. According to Book 3, verse 670 of the Tome Sibylline Oracles, believed to have been composed by Alexandrian Jews, one of the Sibyl's frenzied ravings yielded the following prediction. Fiery swords shall fall from heaven on the earth, great flashing torches flaming through the midst of them, and the earth, mother of all things, shall be shaken in those days by the hand of the immortal, and the fishes of the sea, and all the beasts of the earth, and myriad tribes of birds, and every soul of man, and every sea, shall shudder before the face of the immortal, and there shall be great fear. At the request of a New York Times reporter, the sword was presented to one Mr. Gaston L. Fouardon, a well-known and respected New York antiquarian, who doused some of the more fanciful theories in cold water, with his opinion that the weapon had been forged very recently, its strange symbols having been inscribed with a ruler and compass. It has not, he declared, one solitary point to indicate that it was not made in New York State within the past year, and very poorly made too. It is of iron, and so badly balanced in weight that it could never be used, a blunder that the ancient smith never made. Despite this disappointing pronouncement, public interest in the artifact remained strong. Daniel Bell continued to believe that his son had found something remarkable, and refused to sell the sword for an offer of $1,000, worth about $31,000 today. His neighbor offered to trade his farm for the sword, but Bell declined his offer as well. In March 1889, 6 years after the excitement of the meteorite sword, Daniel D. Bell was convicted of forging signatures in order to obtain genealogical information, apparently while doing research for a history book he was writing on Ulster County, New York. He was sentenced to 12 years in Dannemora prison, where he died on May 5, 1892, at the age of 68. In the decades that succeeded his death, several researchers attempted to dig into the mystery of the sword his son allegedly found in Rondout Creek. Foremost among these investigators was Charles Fort, who wrote letters to people associated with the story and made inquiries through New York newspapers. One journalist who responded to one of his inquiries bizarrely put forth two competing explanations for the Rondout Creek sword in an article for the September 3, 1924 issue of the Kingston Daily Freeman. The first alleged that the sword was a known forgery, citing a series of events, mention of which this author was unable to locate in either of the newspaper archives to which he is subscribed. The meteoric sword story was thoroughly exploded, the journalist wrote, when the blacksmith who had made the sword for Bell brought suit to recover his pay. Scientists located the firm in New York that had furnished some of the metal of the hilt. Dr. Keeter, a reputable man, was not connected with the fake except in newspaper talks given out by Bell. The journalist then went on to reproduce a letter written by U.G. Edinger of Kingston, Ontario, in which the writer proposed another explanation for the origin of the Rondout Creek sword. Back in 1883, Edinger claimed, the village of Rondout, New York, located at the mouth of Rondout Creek, boasted a 22-man gun squad whose duty was to fire a cannon salute whenever a visitor of renown arrived in town by boat. The piece they used for this ceremony was a relic of the Revolutionary War, which had been mounted in a field called Wolsey's Commons. Joe Tubby, a member of the gun squad whose task was to tamp gunpowder down the barrel, crafted an elaborate ramrod for use in the ceremony. One of the designs he inscribed on this implement was a copy of a Greek carving he had purchased while traveling abroad. One day, while firing the cannon, Tubby's ramrod was still in the barrel when the powder was discharged. The accidental projectile sailed through the air in a blaze of fire, before disappearing behind the trees in the general vicinity of Rondout Creek. Edinger proposed that the ramrod might be the sword that Rayleigh Bell discovered, apparently unconcerned by the discrepancy in the object's compositions. Tubby's ramrod was made of wood, while Bell's sword was made of steel. While the sword of Rondout Creek certainly appears to have been some sort of hoax, its story is still surrounded by a fog of mystery, the inevitable lot of so many of these secrets of the archive. I think this will be the last Secrets of the Archive episodes that I'll make, as the series does not seem to have general appeal. If you'd like to keep following the progression of the archive, you can join the associated Patreon page for free, where you'll be updated every time I upload a new box, and any one-time or recurring donations you'd like to make would be very appreciated, as they would help pay for the monthly cost of storing these files and for website fees. Thank you for watching the Secrets of the Archive.